Welcome to the Living Loud and Proud podcast, brought to you by Disability Pride, Pennsylvania. If you need a link to the transcript for this episode, please visit our accessible website at www.disabilitypridepa.org/podcast. And now, here is your host. Welcome to the Living Loud and Proud podcast, Season 2, Episode 2, from Disability Pride, Pennsylvania. I'm your host, Phill Rosen. Today I'm chatting with my co-producer, DECA Horton, about the wheelchair designs and designers of the past and now.
Hello, folks.
Yeah,
how's it going?
So we're going to just kind of really quickly go through all of the different kinds of wheelchairs there are, kind of try to highlight a little bit of like some of the wheelchair designers who are disabled individuals themselves, and kind of talk about, some of the more specialized wheelchairs as well. But broadly speaking, that's the main focus of today. So let's just get started on the different types of wheelchairs. So the first category of wheelchairs I want to talk about is the manual self-propelled wheelchair. There's a couple of different types, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. The first type is the folding chair. These are the classic kind of X-brace designs that you would see like in hospitals and nursing homes or other places that would have wheelchairs available.
But this isn't self-propelled, though, right?
Well, some are not. Most hospital chairs, I don't believe, have wheels big enough on the back to propel yourself with. But, I do want to talk a little bit about the X-brace design because, as people who listened to the last episode of the podcast might remember, is that was created by the company Everest and Jennings. And specifically, Herbert Everest was paralyzed in a mining accident, and he was designing a wheelchair that was a little more lightweight, a little more portable, a little easier for everyone. Okay. And they ended up cornering the market.
Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, I got a little bit confused when you said self-propelled. I'm thinking that the wheelchair itself propels itself. So you're talking about manual propelled ones.
Yes, manual propelled. Yeah, self-propelling meaning the user can propel the wheelchair. Herbert Everest was, instrumental in creating the first modern wheelchair design. And the X-brace, when you think about it too, it looks a lot like those camping chairs that people will go to shows out on the lawn. Right, they go to the Man Center here in Philly or something like that.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of those there. So that's the first kind of type of manually propelled or self-propelled wheelchair that's out there. The other kind that a lot of people would know about is the rigid frame wheelchair. Now, these are usually custom built for the user. One probably very common example, and one of the earliest examples that I could find, was the Quickie wheelchair. And the Quickie wheelchair, as people will probably remember from the last episode as well, was designed by a team of 3 designers. It was Marilyn Hamilton, who was paralyzed in a hang gliding accident, Jim Okamoto, and Don Hellman. And so these features were really created to create an even better wheelchair for users to use, something that's custom built to their body, fits them perfectly, is lighter, easier to maneuver, all of those different things.
Right.
Now, something that's common between the two types of wheelchairs that we just described is the frame. Obviously, they each have a frame. they're distinct frames, but they are frames. They each have a seat. Usually they have foot plates, or a single foot plate. There are different types of foot plates, obviously.
Right. The single foot plate being the wide one that goes the expanse of the wheelchair itself. The width.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the dual foot plate, which, sometimes those are removable. Sometimes they're, rigid, stuck on the chair itself. There's 4 wheels, usually 2 large back wheels and 2 caster wheels in the front.
Right.
There's often a seat cushion for comfort, to, help prevent, things like, stress sores and stuff like that, as well as to make
which
it
is a
more
big problem, having the right cushion.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Anyone who's in a more sedentary position for whatever reason, those types of sores are really important to avoid.
Right.
They can lead to all sorts of different problems. They often include push rims on the back wheels. So, those are like if you ever look at wheelchairs, they are on the outside of the wheels usually. It helps prevent the wheelchair user from getting their hands as dirty.
Right.
Especially when it's like really nasty out.
The push rim is that little, usually chrome wheel, folks, that you see like right at the center that's extended out. And that's where they're used, like Phill said.
Yeah. And usually there are brakes on the back wheels. Now, they're blocks, really. They're not exactly something that you would use to actively brake in the same way that you would, say, like on a bike, right, for instance.
These are just like when you're stationary, so you don't wind up rolling down the hill.
Right, exactly. Or, when you're transferring, you don't have the wheelchair going all over the place. It makes it a lot safer for people. Now, materials that are used are, they're usually aluminum, titanium, or carbon fiber. Titanium and carbon fiber usually are not covered by most insurance here in America.
Right.
Because the materials are a lot more expensive than, say, aluminum. And then some chairs have some extra features like shock absorbers and, the camber angles are often, modified for stability and whatnot. And also a lot of wheelchairs have quick release axles, which usually they consist of like a pin in the center of the wheel that goes into the axle, and you can easily and quickly remove the wheels that way.
Right.
Now there are also attendant propelled wheelchairs that are manual. Those are usually, what you would see in a hospital setting, right, institutional, large venue based. They're usually a lot heavier than self-propelled. Sometimes they're made out of things like steel or heavier materials than, say, aluminum even. So that's like kind of the 2 types of like manual chairs in general that exist. Now we have power chairs, which, those were invented in part by a grant in Canada for George Klein. And this
was when?
This was in the 1950s, 1952.
Oh, okay.
I believe was the first beginnings of it. They went to the market in 1956. Everest and Jennings, of course, cornered the market on it when it hit the market, became mass produced here in America. So, for a long time, there was only one developer of wheelchairs or company that made wheelchairs for most people.
Gotcha.
To use. Now, these are generally electric powered, so they have batteries and often have like a little joystick attached to them that, the wheelchair user can use to propel the chair. And there's like a couple of different types of power chairs as well. There's indoor chairs, which they reliably really only work on flat surfaces, like flat, smooth surfaces, like
Right.
hardwood floors. Maybe a tile floor would be okay.
They're the slippers version
Right.
of wheelchairs.
Exactly. Then there's like indoor outdoor chairs, which are less limited to like an indoor chair. But if there's a steep grade, like a heavy slope, probably not going to be able to climb that very easily, if at
Right.
all. And then there are outdoor chairs, of course, and they're more capable than the indoor outdoor chairs, but they still have a lot of a lot left to be desired when it comes to things like snow, rain.
Yeah.
Don't even think about going to the beach with one of these.
Yeah. Right.
um, so and then there's like these kind of specialist designs. These are highly specialized and can traverse most terrain. One example, and this is generally not covered by insurance in my research, is the iBot, who was invented by Dean Kamen. If anyone remembers the early 2000s, he created the Segway.
Okay.
And it uses the same kind of similar technology, gyroscopic technology. And there's 4 powered drive wheels and 2 caster wheels. It has a couple of different modes. Standard mode, which is just 2 drive wheels on the ground with the 2 caster wheels.
Mm-hmm.
4-wheel mode uses the 4 drive wheels on the ground, which handles the rougher terrain that you might experience.
Okay.
Dean Kamen lives in New Hampshire, up in New England, so things like snow, rain, sleet.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can go onto like harder packed beaches, so some sandy terrain as well.
Right.
Can also handle curbs, like small curbs.
Okay.
Balance mode, which raises the user to eye level height.
Oh yes, those.
And it
Yeah,
balances on the 2 drive wheels. And then stair mode allows trained users to ascend and descend stairs, which for a lot of people is a huge thing, given how many places in the world don't actually have ramps of any kind or
Right.
elevators or anything like that. And sometimes even lifts, like places that have lifts, the lift is out of commission or really janky.
Right.
Whatever.
We see so often.
Right, exactly. And obviously these powered chairs are generally heavier than manual chairs, mostly because of the electrics, the battery, the motor.
Right.
The frame can be heavy as well because it needs to be more robust to be able to handle all of the different like stresses that having the electric motor and the torque
Right.
with that can bring. So now we're going to move on to mobility scooters, which are a little bit more controversial. Opinions divided as to whether they can be considered wheelchairs. They do share some features with power chairs. They have a motor, the battery power, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Primarily intended for people who have a limited ability to walk, people, maybe people who have CP or, have fatigue issues.
Right. Can't be on their feet too long.
Can't go long distances without some assistance usually. Typically, they're 3-wheeled. They have a base control tiller and a seat. The control tiller is often connected to a wheel on the front, and then there's 2 in the back that, where the seat is closer to. And there are 4-wheeled scooters that have a more substantial seat. They tend to be for individuals that have, are larger.
Gotcha.
So, they need the extra wheel to maintain stability.
Yeah.
And then there's actually, we're going to move on to a subset of manual self-propelled wheelchairs.
Manual self-propelled.
Yeah, they're single arm drive wheelchairs. And these are wheelchairs that enable one arm propulsion.
Mm-hmm.
So this is for, wheelchair users who, you know, are don't have a limb, or amputees, whatever, and are unable to walk long distances, or
Got it.
yeah. They usually have two concentric hand rims on the wheel that is being used to propel the chair.
Mhm.
And usually the way that it works is uh, there's one hand rim on the inside that's like, it's a larger diameter rim usually,
Got it.
but it's like further like into the wheel itself, like it's closer to the wheel.
Right.
And then there's the smaller rim on the outside that's usually a smaller diameter, and it's connected to the opposite wheel via a smaller concentric angle, or axle, excuse me, not angle. Um, so if you want to go straight, you grasp both hand rims. And if you grasp one or the other, you'll turn in whatever direction
Got it.
you want. To kind of wrap my head around this, I had to watch some videos on YouTube. Thanks to all of the people on YouTube who are users of these single arm drive wheelchairs,
Right.
for doing that, because I was having such a hard time wrapping my head around it.
Trying to just visualize it with your imagination.
Right, exactly. For some users who have a little bit more dexterity in their lower limbs,
Mhm.
there are some models that control steering via a foot plate, using the front casters.
Okay.
So basically, from what I could kind of gather, this is kind of like similar to having like pedals, and you would like
Okay.
depress the pedal depending on which direction you want to go.
Right. I get it.
Yeah. And then we're moving on to reclining or tilting chairs. So reclining chairs have a seat back that tilts backwards, similar to, say, a recliner that someone might have in their living room or den.
Right.
There are both manual and power chairs that have this feature.
Uh-huh.
Some allow the user to lie completely flat. They're, obviously you know, people who have, like, say, spinal cord injuries or whatnot would use most likely a power chair,
Right.
because, they will have limited ability
Right.
to use
Anyone who has
buttons.
severe, severe mobility issues, or don't have the strength to handle a manual wheel.
Right. Um, and tilting chairs have a seat back, base, and leg rest that tilt back as a single unit. These are mainly used for individuals who need to maintain a particular posture or have other needs to maintain other devices
Yes.
in a relative position throughout the day.
Right.
Think of people who might be paralyzed
Right.
in one form or another. They're also common amongst people with cerebral palsy, which, that makes sense in a lot of ways too, because of the ways in which cerebral palsy can manifest itself in the body.
Right.
That limits their mobility in all the different joints that,
Right.
they have. They're more common than reclining chairs when we're talking about like wheelchairs designed for children. Because like with the reclining chairs, like you would have to, it's like shoes, right? You would have to, constantly keep changing it for a growing child.
Yeah.
Throughout their life, and it's generally more resource effective to use something that you don't need to replace every year or every 6 months.
Exactly.
And then there's also standing wheelchairs, which allow for the user to be supported in a nearly standing position. There are power and manual chairs with this option. Manual standing chairs can be entirely manual, meaning that are like a series of levers that someone would manually uh, use to work with this, stand up,
Yeah.
or have a full powered stand function. So, like, maybe it's a self propelled wheelchair, right? Like a user propelled wheelchair, but they would have to, they have like a little switch or whatever that they can use to stand up with.
Right.
Um, Now, there are a lot of benefits to this. I think the benefits are probably pretty obvious. They foster independence and productivity, um, increase psychological well being,
Exactly.
social status, so extended access, and it can ease a lot of medical conditions by reducing pressure,
Yeah.
reducing pressure sores, like we talked about. Improve respiration in individuals that need that extra support for their diaphragm. Um, Reduced occurrence of UTIs in individuals that are prone to
Right.
them. Improve flexibility, maintain the bone mineral density, which is really important for some people with disabilities to maintain, because
Right.
you know reduced motion means that
Basically,
it'll all go away.
you got to take into consideration corrective measures for your well-being and your health with your
Exactly.
wheelchair. And
Exactly.
some of these are specifically designed just for that. Going back to what you stated in the beginning, talking about the posture, someone who needs to be healing, like maybe from a spinal cord injury, they can't be in a wheelchair slumped, if there's chances for them to regain some kind of mobility, yeah, yeah, I get it.
All right. And now, folks, we're moving on to sports chairs. Um, a lot of these chairs tend to be non-folding chairs, to have increased rigidity, which is important, especially in contact type sports. Think wheelchair rugby or you know football, hockey, whatever you know you might be playing. Um, they have a pronounced negative camber a lot of the time, which increases stability and allows for sharp turns. Very important for people who are doing various track and field
Right.
type events. They're often made of extra lightweight composite materials, and this is to help enhance, um, the speed that someone might be able to propel themselves at. They're often customized to the sport, so like some types of chairs they're designed for the user to be seated, like in a wheelchair rugby type chair. And racing chairs are generally designed for the user to kneel. And actually, one notable person that I want to mention here is Bob Hull, who he participated in the Boston Marathon in a self-designed wheelchair. Um, and this wheelchair was, necessary for him because he had polio as a child and reduced mobility as a result in his adulthood. Um,
Yeah.
and this was actually a wheelchair that was put on display at MoMA in the 1980s, as people might remember from the last episode.
Okay.
Um, so, very important individual. He designed several wheelchairs, including some non-sports type wheelchairs as well. But the sports wheelchairs are probably very notable because those are very similar to what you would see today, like a Paralympian may use. Um, and there are power chair sports that exist, like hockey or power chair football or soccer here in America, us damn Yankees. um, but yeah, so let's move on to some all-terrain chairs. There are two formats. Uh, there's like the wheelchair mountain bike hybrid, which this is a wheelchair frame that generally has like four mountain bike tires. So instead of having caster wheels, there would be two uh, bike tires on the front as well as on the back. Generally, there's no push rims, and the propulsion is by pushing directly on the tires. Um, so, your hands are probably going to get a little bit dirty, but, if you're off roading, it probably doesn't matter that much. Um, and then there are beach wheelchairs, which they either will have like extra wide balloon wheels, uh, that like allow the weight to be spread out a little bit more. So that helps with things that are easily compressible, like sand or snow. It helps increase the stability and decrease the pressure on the ground. And the other type of tires that you might see would be like a track tire, something similar to like say backhoe or a tank.
Right.
Um, and then there are also like smart wheelchairs, which are like any power chair that uses a control system to augment or replace user control. Generally computer controlled in some fashion. There's often a suite of sensors that apply mobile robotic techniques. Things like ultrasonic acoustic rangefinders. Something that you might think of more colloquially as sonar, even though that is like a brand name, I think.
Right.
And or an infrared red rangefinder, which when you think like IR sensors, like think like a
Okay.
TV remote,
I was not ready to
right?
ask. Wait a minute. Hold on. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So, and the interface can be one of three different types of things generally. Joystick, like on other power chairs. A sip and puff device, which, when you think about those are like those little like mouthpieces that some wheelchairs might have. There's like usually a bar
Yes.
that comes up and goes to the user's mouth.
Right.
And this is for people who have like basically no
Then
dexterity
Stephen
in their arm.
Hawking's and others like him have that same. Yeah.
Yes. And then for people who maybe don't have like the ability to use a joystick but have some range of motion in their arms, a touch sensitive display could be used. So, this would be like a touch screen in front of their face or, close by, that they would use to power the wheelchair and propel it.
Right.
And now we're going to get into, I think, one of the more interesting parts of all of this stuff. There's like accessories that go along with wheelchairs. So there are like powered devices that you can attach to manual wheelchairs, self-propelled wheelchairs. So there's like some powered and less powered. One of the more common type of powered devices that you might see would be something like the smart drive, which is a motor encased in a housing with a wheel on the back. You attach it to the back of the wheelchair, and it helps people who are using their wheelchair to move about more easily through the world on relatively level surfaces. This is good for people who have, some ability to use a manual wheelchair, but maybe need a little bit of help to get through their day.
Mm-hmm.
Or have some, requirements to move around a lot in a way that maybe is very tiring for them. There are also things called hand cycles, which they clip to the front of the chair, usually like on the foot plate. They have pedals on the front, and usually you would use your hands to propel them that way. Um, and then there's also a device that's similar to the hand cycle called the free wheel, which is like a dolly wheel that is often attached to the front of a manual wheelchair. Um, this improves the performance over rough terrain. So, like, people who have like maybe a rigid wheelchair that normally you wouldn't want to go off roading with, but they want to go hike or something on like a you know unpaved path of some sort. That could be a good option to work with.
Okay.
You would propel the chair using the rear wheels of the chair, so it's literally just a wheel that's on the front. Um, and then there's like some other wheelchair designs that are really kind of interesting, like the leveraged freedom chair. Um, this was designed by the MIT Mobility Lab. It's low cost, intended to be used in like places in developing countries that are like rural. So like, think like rural India or Africa, or even, maybe more impoverished places in places like South America would be good examples of where these would be intended to be used. They use local materials. Often they share a lot of parts with bikes, which are,
Right.
and this makes it so it's very easy for people who get stranded somewhere with their wheelchair to be able to fix it, because they don't need to have specialized wrenches. They can literally just go, have a set of wrenches that would work on bikes, do all the same kinds of fixes on them that they would need to for a bike. And some of these chairs, if you watch videos of them, some are, propelled by using the wheels, by pushing the wheels. Others have hand-controlled levers, and the hand-controlled levers often allow for a little bit more off-roading ability, because you can have just the one wheel in the front, and it'll more easily kind of bounce up and down through on rough roads, which in rural areas in less developed countries is very important. And then there's also, moving on, geared mechanical wheels that you can get. These incorporate like a reduction gear into the wheel design. So think kind of like a mountain bike, or even like a street bike, where you have like multiple different gears to be able to more easily get up and down hills. And most of these wheel designs have two speed ratios, 1-to-1, which is no assistance, and 2-to-1, which is 100% increased assistance to go uphill. The low gear does incorporate a hill hold function that's automatic to hold the wheelchair in place between pushes. So like if you're in the middle of like a push and you get like, for whatever reason, there's a delay, you're not going to go rolling back down the hill that you've already gotten back. It's not going to be, some Sisyphean task. Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah. For those of you who don't know that reference, check out Sisyphus in Greek mythology. Just Google it and get to the Wikipedia page.
It also provides downhill control on descent. So, and if you do need to push backwards while going uphill, it does allow you to override it. If you are using one of these types of wheels. And so that's like kind of a really quick, basic, kind of dirty sort of overview of the different types of wheelchairs that are available. I will say that unfortunately a lot of these types of wheelchairs, especially the more technologically advanced with more bells and whistles type wheelchairs are not covered by insurance here, at least in the US where we are located. But, the fact that these chairs exist is, I think, important to recognize because it shows that there is potentially hope for them to be more easily available and practicable for more everyday users of wheelchairs. So, and, I think it's important as well, like I said, to kind of think about all the different people who design these, even some of the non-disabled individuals, because it shows that there are a lot of people who are trying to work on making the world more accessible, even if it isn't directly affecting them right now in this moment. Ray, do you have any other thoughts, additional thoughts on this topic of wheelchairs that exist and the people who designed them?
No. That was pretty informative. And if there's a deep dive for any one particular subject that was mentioned, I mean, hey, we can hear, request or response from the different listeners, and maybe do a deeper dive on one particular thing. But no, I can't think of anything else. Feels like you covered a lot, Yeah,
and unfortunately, anyone who wants to hear more about Sisyphus, you're gonna have to do your own research on that. I don't think it's gonna quite fit into the podcast theme.
Yeah, no, it's not exactly. Yeah, nah.
I mean, you can make the argument that he is disabled in one form or another, but I don't think it's gonna be a real stretch. You're gonna be splitting hairs at that point.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for coming on, Ray. I really appreciate it.
And I appreciate being here.
Yeah. So, folks, that was our second episode of the season 2, Wheelchair Part 2, all about the development and types of wheelchairs that are available for people to use. If you have any, thoughts, comments, or any sort of other topics that you might want to see covered, please let us know. And come right back here to listen all about more disability culture and, the history of other types of assistive technology being developed.
All righty.
Bye.
All righty, folks. Have a good day now.
Please visit our accessible website at www.disabilitypridepa.org. You can find us on social media at Disability Pride PA on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.